There seems to be some confusion among Catholics who believe that Francis upheld Catholic orthodoxy on the sin that I have to call around here the James Martin sin, the one that we associate with that priest, whose name has become synonymous with that sin. There's some confusion about this because, for whatever reason, Francis, when he gave his famous talk using a strong language that I won't dare use here on social media, he said, but he said something that a lot of people picked up on, that there was too much of a certain kind of sin in the church these days. And a lot of people, for whatever reason, took him at face value. They forgot that he used exactly that kind of language, but just not an extreme, crude way that he did there, to describe traditional priests, traditionalists, people who like the liturgy. He's joked about how the church actually already has women in the priesthood. All you have to do is look at all the priests who like fancy attire and things, the lace and the saturnos and all the rest of it. He's used that language to describe traditional priests. And so he then backtracked because people took it to mean what most people took it to mean, more like that he was excoriating men like James Martin. And so he backtracked and backtracked again. And then the Italian bishop said, no, we love priests of that kind. We love them. James Martin came out recently saying, if only you knew how many priests in the church were like that, you would not be able to have a functioning church without them. And on and on and on it goes. Today we're going to talk about the biggest sign yet that he was clearly not talking about them, which has to do with a seminarian, former seminarian, who was kicked out of the seminary or not permitted to become a seminarian in the first place because he was of the James Martin inclination. And how Francis told him, no, go ahead, go enter the seminary. And then after we're going to talk about why the church says what it does on that sin. Because the church says some pretty tough things about that sin. There's a very short document from the Vatican 20 years ago released where they say why you can't do that. Sort of, but it explicitly says having those inclinations bars you from active service, active ministry in the church, in the sacred priesthood. So that's what we're going to talk about today, as well as something that came across my desk in Twitter just minutes before going live. That's all unfortunately related to the evil sin celebrated this month, and especially tied to the topic at hand. So let's start with the story from the first source that broke it, which is from Il Messaggero, which I believe is an Italian news site. This is translated using a Google Chrome extension, so you'll have to forgive any clunkiness of the language here. This has since been repeated in other outlets, but we want to go right to the source for this. So his headline sort of is, Pope Francis in the email to the James Martin type young man, excluded from the seminary, pursue your vocation. Lorenzo sent a letter to the pontiff after the shocking sentence about James Martin types among aspiring priests. Your words give me hope. I want to be a priest. So clearly, this young man who needs your prayers, so please pray for clarity for him on all these things. He did not take Francis's words to be excluding people from the types we're talking about here, obliquely, from the priesthood. Far from it. He probably read that language in the way that traditionalists should be reading that language. That anybody who is after all, he said on 60 Minutes, that being conservative is an ideology and a malady. But he said of them a whole host of heinous things right at the same time he said this stuff. So remember that as we go over this article. So from the article published on Sunday, quote, Dear one of the many seeds in the Lord's vineyard, Jesus calls everyone, go ahead with your vocation. The Pope responds in his own handwritten letter, as he loves to do, with the empathy he reserves for those asking for help and words that open glimmers of hope. And he does it after the gaffe, the unfortunate exit pronounced in a closed-door meeting in the Vatican and leaked from there. That there's already too much redacted said to the bishops while the issue of the entry of James Martin types into the seminary. Lorenzo Michel No Caruso, 22 years old, like many others, had felt embittered, disappointed, displaced. A wound had reopened. I was excluded from the seminary because I said it was of that inclination, he told Il Messaggero. On May 28th, he wrote an email, 3 pages in which he opened his heart to the Holy Father, spoke about his life, his strong vocation, the doors he received in his face. On June 1st, the pontiff's response was unexpected. Thank you so much for your email, says the Pope in the handwritten card, scanned and attached to the email. One of your expressions struck me: toxic and elective clericalism. And it's true. Do you know that clericalism is a plague? It's an ugly worldliness, and as a great theologian says, worldliness is the worst that can happen to the church, worse even than the era of the concubinary popes. Here he's referring to a period about 1,000 years ago where the papacy was in a lot worse condition than it actually is today, but not in a doctrinal or dogmatic sense. Those popes had the sense not to touch that stuff, but they were living it up, we'll say. God granted us the papacy, let us enjoy it, is what one of the popes of that era said. And boy, did they enjoy it. Wonder how they felt about it after they went to their judgment, though. Jesus calls everyone, everyone. Some think of the church as a customs house, and that's bad. The church must be open to all. Brother, go ahead with your vocation. Then the greeting. I pray for you. Please do it for me. I need it. May the Lord bless you and Our Lady keep you. Fraternally, Francesco. Now, the church actually has definitively ruled in documents written by then Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger under John Paul II that actually, no, you can't. It doesn't go as far as it should in explaining why, but it's pretty obvious why, because it was written in 2005. Think about the timing of that. Take all the time you need. And you will see, if you understand what was going on in the church in 2005, why they said what they said. They knew they cannot have men like that in the priesthood because the McCarrick news was kind of dominating the news. When it wasn't the American military operations going on at the time, it was bad news in the church. Those are the two things dominating the headlines in those days. We'll get to that here in a second, though. Lorenzo visualized it while he was at work in Florence. It was 9:30 p.m. I got the notification. I panicked. I took a 5-minute break before starting again. She writes very small. I didn't understand some words. She meaning, again, this is a translation issue. He, meaning Francis. But what a beautiful response from him. It makes it clear who the real Pope is. He is not what they were led to believe. This letter gives me hope. Now the seminary remains a dream that has not been put aside. He told me, continue with your vocation, not, don't worry, there are other paths. My whole story has been dotted with these responses. When a religious man discovered my inclinations, no matter how much he had appreciated my person and my faith until a minute before, he would respond like this: there are many ways to decline a vocation. In fact, they denied me the possibility of having a priestly vocation. Continue, urges Pope Francis. His incitement made the rounds of James Martin-type Catholic associations, border parish priests, and the parents of many of that kind who fight for their children and to be part of the church. And it spread and it spread and it spread. You get the idea. Thanks, Francis. Thanks a lot. The church, again, has definitively said no to this. And it had to, because unequivocally, there's an undeniable link between men with that inclination and Ted McCarrick and his evil deeds. It is undeniable. The John Jay report, first draft issued in about 2005, outlined as such, said exactly that was the case. The U.S. bishops didn't like that at all and asked them to redraft it. I mean, the first draft is still floating around. I wish I had it, but I remember looking at that document, reading the data outputs, the social science data outputs, the boring stuff that most researchers don't read, but I was trained to read that stuff, and I have never, as a trained social scientist, ever seen a perfect correlation between data and like two data points before. It was perfect. It was undeniable. And the U.S. bishop said, no. So let's go to the Vatican document that we're talking about here on why you can't do this stuff. Because, again, it is true. They actually did this. This is for the Congregation for Catholic Education. One of those now probably dicasteries we never really talk about. We never have a real reason to talk about them. But it's called Instruction Concerning the Criteria for the Discernment of Vocations with regard to persons with James Martin inclinations in view of their admission to the seminary and to holy orders. This was issued in 2005 in November. So this wouldn't have been under Cardinal Ratzinger. He was Pope Benedict XVI at that time. But this was the Vatican's official response nearly 20 years ago. How quickly they tossed this out. And by the way, if you need an example of how Benedict was Pope and doing things that were appropriate for a Pope to be doing given the problems in the church at the time, but for whatever reason, the hierarchy of the church was ignoring him. This is like example A. He had the Roman Curia do what was supposed to be done. And for whatever reason, they put out the document and then everybody ignored it. That was kind of what was going on a lot during those days. Here's the text, though. In continuity with the teaching of the Second Vatican Council, and in particular with the decree Optatatum Totius on priestly formation, the Congregation for Catholic Education has published various documents with the aim of promoting a suitable, integral formation of future priests by offering guidelines and precise norms regarding its diverse aspects. In the meantime, the 1990 Synod of Bishops is also reflected on the formation of priests in the circumstances of the present day, with the intention of bringing to completion the doctrine of the Council on this theme and making it more explicit and effective in today's world. Following this synod, 1990, Pope John Paul II published the post-synodal apostolic exhortation, Pastoras Dabo Vobis. In light of this abundant teaching, the present instruction does not intend to dwell on all questions in the area of affectivity and the flesh that require an attentive discernment during the entire period of formation. Rather, it contains norms concerning a specific question, made more urgent by the current situation. This is the McCarrick fallout in 2003, not specifically McCarrick, but those priests. Boston, 2003. Anybody who's not really young remembers those dark days. And that is this: whether to admit to the seminary and holy orders candidates who have deep-seated James Martin inclinations. According to the constant tradition of the Church, only a baptized person who is male validly receives sacred ordination. By means of the sacrament of orders, the Holy Spirit configures the candidate to Jesus Christ in a new specific way. The priest, in fact, sacramentally represents Christ, the head, shepherd, and spouse of the Church. Because of this configuration to Christ, the entire life of the sacred minister must be animated by the gift of his whole person to the Church and by an authentic pastoral charity. The candidate to ordained ministry, therefore, must reach effective maturity. Such maturity will allow him to relate correctly to both men and women, developing in him a true sense of spiritual fatherhood towards the church community that will be entrusted to him. From the time of the Second Vatican Council until today, various documents of the magisterium, and especially the Catechism of the Catholic Church, have confirmed the teaching of the Church on the sin in question. The Catechism distinguishes between the activities and tendencies. Regarding acts, it teaches the sacred scripture presents them as grave sins. The capital T tradition has constantly considered them as intrinsically immoral and contrary to the natural law. Consequently, under no circumstances can they be approved. Francis, I think, should read this today. Deep-seated such tendencies, which are found in a number of men and women, are also objectively disordered, and for those same people often constitute a trial. Such persons must be accepted with respect and sensitivity. Every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard should be avoided. They are called to fulfill God's will in their lives and to unite to the sacrifice of the Lord's cross the difficulties they may encounter. Let's pause here. There are plenty of Catholics, Courage International is an organization for the Catholics we're talking about here, who have those inclinations, who lay them at the foot of the cross. They carry their cross daily and live as the Church demands they live in accordance to their state in life, just like the rest of us are called to live in accordance with our state of life. Those Catholics, there's a reason that organization is called Courage. They are courageous. There are examples, those who have successfully done it, or even who have to go to confession like everybody else with any kind of inclination to a sin of the flesh, who are constantly striving for sanctity. They are courageous Catholics. They should be afforded decency and treated with respect. Many of them were the most upset about fiducia supplicans, by the way, if you remember my coverage of that now 6 months ago. Let's continue. In light of such teaching, this dicastery, in accord with the Congregation for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments, believes it is necessary to state clearly that the Church, while profoundly respecting the persons in question, cannot admit to seminary or holy orders those who practice the sin, present deep-seated tendencies, or support the so-called culture attached to it. Can't have the inclinations. Such persons, in fact, find themselves in a situation that gravely hinders them from relating correctly to men and women. One must in no way overlook the negative consequences that can derive from the ordination of persons with such tendencies. That's their oblique reference to what was going on in 2003. Different, however, would be the case in which one were dealing with such tendencies that were only the expression of a transitory problem. For example, that of adolescence not yet superseded. Nevertheless, such tendencies must be clearly overcome at least 3 years before ordination to the diaconate. And there's your window there. And want to know why that a lot of people, we have this problem now? Because they left that window in. It was then exploited by careless bishops, or by people lying to vocations directors, or worse, by bishops who wanted more men like that in the priesthood. You cannot allow that into the priesthood. It is a miracle that there hasn't been any really high profile McCarrick problems in the church recently. It's a miracle. And as you'll see in a video I'm making for next week, the U.S. bishops are celebrating this. We'll see. They should be careful about being a little jubilant about the fact that on that question, the McCarrick question, life in the church is basically as it should be. It's kind of sad when they are celebrating something like that. Instead, it should be handled with some solemnity. You'll see the video I'm talking about in the coming days. Evelyn says, so that sin in question is attracted to destroy the purity and life required in the life of the clergy and the people it serves. Yes. And it causes sort of an untenable situation in the relation between clergy and the laity. And I'm going to give you, in a pivot here to wrap this up, pray for everybody involved in this story, please. And for that young man we spoke about, okay? He feels like he's called to the priesthood. And I would hope that to the letter of that document that it's followed, but you should never know really about the priests and deacons that you surround you, about what their tastes are about certain things. You shouldn't. There's never a reason to bring it up. And that is why I question all of this, because the having gone through the vocations process, they do, at least the good dioceses, the ones that are handled properly, will ask you about those things. But the way he recounted that story did not make it sound like it was. It almost sounds like the young man volunteered that information, and that's kind of troubling. Anyway, on Twitter, posted by the executive director at Outreach Catholic, which is an organization that has blocked me on Twitter, so I'm surprised he overlooked doing that here. Maybe he'll fix that after he hears about this. He posted this for hashtag of this month of sin. Outreach Catholic, which is the organization founded by James Martin to outreach to the James Martin crowd, and who consistently advocate consistently advocate for the church essentially changing or teaching on these sins, is collecting 100-word essays about a moment when he felt proud to be of the James Martin crowd and Catholic. Submit your short essay today for a chance to be published at Outreach sometime this month. We're seeking anecdotes rich in detail, in which seemingly small or ordinary moments convey deep truths or prompt thoughtful questions. And I just want to show you this one here. Joshua Charles is a great, relatively new to the scene commentator who really focuses on talking to Protestants about errors and their errors and things. But his response here is really great. He says, my sister lived such life for many years. She became Catholic when she realized that inclination for those desires was not her identity, and Christ had come to save her and give her a new identity. She could live a holy, chaste life in which her identity wasn't her disordered inclinations, but in being a Catholic follower of Christ, taking up her cross and following him. That is all we Christians can and should be proud of. That's a mic drop moment, folks. He's not wrong. Sonny Jim says, for those people with their inclinations is who they are, and like us, the rest of us, for them, it's to be who they are and have to practice who they are. There's no being celebrating with that, no celibacy with that proclivity. Yeah, it's the ones who manage to do it. That's heroic virtue. That's what Courage International fosters, is tries to foster heroic virtue in people. And that is why those people who are in that group, who are part of Courage International, whether they stumble occasionally and get back on their feet and go to the sacraments and they try to live according to the laws of the church, they are people to be admired. And that is one of the reasons I was so angry at Fiducia Supplicans. Their anger about it was far, they felt betrayed. And I can't believe, and it doesn't surprise me. All right. Thanks very much, folks, today for tuning in. Any final thoughts in the live chat? And if not, hit the like button. It does help send this out to more people. And we'll check the live chat one more time. Michelle says, stay Catholic to your faith and know it well. Yes. That is the only thing that these days that you need to worry about, and get to know your faith. Learn your faith. Learn what the church always taught about anything. Read books published from before about 1950. For the most part, that's your sure guidestone. This isn't, secret of knowledge at all. It's all out there. You can learn the faith and get clear answers by reading old books, reading old writings of popes and things. You can learn the faith, even if there's a lot of ambiguity and wishy-washiness from Rome today. All right, folks, thanks very much for tuning in today. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.